Welcome to the Quantum Business Book Club. We will finish this year looking at some of the Western world's favorite fantasy fiction novels, because these authors and these creators and these visionaries saw what was possible. I call it quantum business because every page I open bends time. I can sit across the table from genius like Huxley, Tolkien, and Le Guin. I can trade notes with minds who built entire realities during collapse. And now you are invited to join me. Each of these books reshaped how I lead, create, and play the long game. For me, reading isn't consumption. It's also not distraction. It helps me play the game to win. In fact, these books allow me to be the game designer. So this season is our Fantasy and Magic series, The Myth Makers of Revolution. Every time the world industrializes, someone rediscovers magic. I'm Nicole VZ, and this is your field manual for founders and CEOs, creative visionaries, artists, leaders, and those of you willing to build something amidst the destruction. This is the next age of business in the wreckage of the last. Each week, we will pull a thread from writers who faced war, tyranny, and mechanization and turned them into myth. They built the map to hope. From Soviet satire to celestial wonder, we decode the leadership patterns that kept humanity awake inside the darkness. This isn't nostalgia. This is navigation. Welcome. Welcome back to our second installment of the Quantum Business Book Club. Last week, we talked about A Brave New World, and this week, we're talking about 1984. Again, I could not have planned this. It was not part of some larger design, and as I reread this book, it was staggering how relevant, how potentially infuriating, but hopefully inspiring this takeaway is going to be for you. And I stumbled upon these particular books because initially, and I think I mentioned this last week, this whole segment was inspired by binging Lord of the Rings. Sometimes when I need to disassociate, I read fantasy fiction. And for anyone who's read Lothar, you know, like it's just kind of like an old friend. You can just like give a call and you can kind of open to any page. And as I was starting from the beginning, it was one of those weekends where I found myself in bed at 7:00 on a Friday night. I blame the current times that we are in. When I realized, holy shit, this book reads like a master plan for overthrowing totalitarian government. Is that just me desperately seeking hope? Or was the author telling me something through the times and ether? And is this book doing what I think all books do, which is help me time travel to a place with a creative genius where we have the opportunity to mind meld, and I might be able to take back a thing or two to my present day? And I looked up when Lord of the Rings was written, and we'll get there. It'll be the last one of this series. And it was written during World War II. And I thought, that's exactly what this author was doing. That's exactly what Tolkien was telling me. And then I wondered how many other fantasy novels were written during dark times. And perhaps Tolkien wasn't the only one reaching through space and calendars to grab me and go, hey, magic saves. Ideas change the world. Create in a time of destruction. We currently live in a time where words fracture before they finish leaving mouths. Meanings blur. Truth has become a subscription service. You scroll, you scan, you, quote, agree to terms, unquote. I was swapping all of my banking over, and had to quickly scroll through pages and pages and pages of terms while someone was on the phone with me. And I said to her, does anyone ever stop and read this? And she giggled and said, no, of course not. What did I just sign my life away to? As I clicked, agreed. So whose terms, whose truths, whose subscriptions? I mean, where is any of this going? Every headline bends slightly to fit the algorithm's mood. Every platform is the ministry of truth, manufacturing coherence from chaos. George Orwell would recognize this place. He was one of these authors that desperately screamed through his pages, we can do different, we can do better, but we're going to need our imaginations. We're going to need a little bit of intuition. We're going to have to stay inspired in order to defeat the overwhelming odds. When Orwell wrote 1984 in 1949, Europe still smelt of smoke and rationed tea. For those of you that don't know, my father, his entire family was killed in the Holocaust 10 years prior. He was born in 48, and he didn't have to flee his homeland of Poland until the mid-50s because of the communist occupation. And so I've spent a lot of time obsessing over World War II for very obvious reasons, but the ongoing effects in Europe of what totalitarian government, of what fear does, I mean, it impacts DNA, let alone societies and cultures and history. So 1949 was still an incredibly challenging time, perhaps not of war, but of superpowers and regimes and philosophies and principles that were dissonant to the point of destruction. The war was technically over, yet the air still felt occupied. Propaganda, bureaucracy, grief, treaties couldn't sign these away. Cities were rebuilding, but faster than trust ever could. Empires were shrinking, but ideologies were exploding to fill the vacuum. The Soviet experiment had curdled into surveillance, and the West answered with advertising. Both sides mastered the same new technology, the weaponization of language. Orwell, nay, Eric Blair, had seen it up close. He'd fought in Spain, watched comrades murdered by their own propaganda, and returned home to a London that preferred denial over nuance. Tuberculosis shredded his lungs, poverty his wallet, but clarity never left his mind. He moved to a tiny Scottish island carrying a typewriter, a sheaf of notes, and one moral obsession. If words lose their meaning, people lose their freedom. So he wrote 1984 as both a diagnosis and a devotional, an act of love for language itself. He wasn't warning us to despair. He was begging us to stay awake. You noticing a theme? Stay with me. He wanted readers to notice the small erosions, the friendly slogans that reverse their meanings, the bureaucracies that promise peace by erasing the need for it. In his book, reality is rewritten every day by a ministry whose job is to lie convincingly. The protagonist, Winston Smith, edits history so that the past always agrees with the present. It's genius. No rebellion can form when yesterday no longer exists. Like I said, you can't make this shit up. Look around. Your digital dashboards update in real time. Yesterday's data is already obsolete. We call it agility, efficiency, optimization. Orwell called it the mutability of the past. Different language, same function, to make truth a moving target. But here's the part that a lot of readers might miss. Orwell's world was already our world in prototype. He wrote during the first great age of mass communication, radio, newsreel, and the birth of advertising psychology. Some might even argue that World War II was the exercise of mass media in real time. Can we get the masses to activate on a level we had only ever been able to communicate one-to-one prior? Propaganda had gone professional. We like to call it marketing. Public relations was the new euphemism for thought management. There was a really interesting 5-part docuseries on Netflix ages ago. It was Sigmund Freud's nephew who started using the news and newspapers as a means for mass influence. And he coined the term public relations. And I believe that's the name of the documentary. But it's fascinating because he had been steeped in psychology, obviously being Freud's nephew. And he recognized this idea of groupthink. And if you can get the masses to collectively agree on something, you can then also get them to take action on something. Public relations was the new euphemism for thought management. Factories had shifted from building weapons to building desire. And governments left and right learned to package fear and sell it as duty. Orwell saw the pattern forming. Once information scales, manipulation industrializes. And he realized that the first victims of any tyranny are not the dissidents. It's the dictionary. So what does that mean for you, my dear listener? The creative, the founder, the business owner, the trailblazer, the artist. If you're trying to create in the 21st century, it means that every product, every campaign, every story you ship either clarifies reality or corrodes it. Language is infrastructure. And every CEO is a legislator of meaning. It is a big responsibility. That's why most people aren't listening. But seriously, that's why most people aren't doing this. And that's why I believe that self-employment, that business, that taking yourself and your art so seriously, you're willing to make it your job, is the ultimate act of rebellion. It's the most punk rock thing you can do. It is building worlds within the systems we wish to dismantle, whatever that might look like for you. So this is my own personal protest. Thank you for joining me. When Orwell described newspeak, even this one was just like, oh my fucking God. When Orwell described newspeak, a language engineered to make certain thoughts impossible, he wasn't inventing science fiction. He was anticipating branding gone feral. A world where vocabulary shrinks to slogans, everybody sounds the same. There is a certain diction that carries with it influence and power and this assumption of fact. Nuance dies. And thought itself becomes a product category. Sound familiar? In our feeds, on our TVs, in our channels, complexity collapses into polarity. Conversations become campaigns. The goal isn't understanding, it's engagement. It is attention. That's newspeak in our time. So here's where hope enters. You knew it was coming. Knowing the pattern gives you power. If you can see it, you have choice and agency. Once you hear how fear and language intertwine, you can discern and design systems that do the opposite. Expand vocabulary, invite ambiguity, allow for a gray area, make curiosity profitable. I remember when I was running my recording studio and record label, and I fucked up. I made it was tens of thousands of dollars mistake in terms of getting gear shipped to one of my bands. So I was touring as well. And I was crying on the floor. And he wasn't a business partner, but he was a mate. Like, we'd built a couple studios together, and he owned his own studio and his own record label, and he couldn't get a hold of me, which was very unusual at that time. And he came over, he lived down the road, and like knocked on the door, and I was like, whoa. And I opened the door, and he's like, BZ, what the fuck are you doing? And I was like, I'm crying, I'm sad, I fucked up. And he was like, okay. And I was like, well, it's over. I'm a fraud. You know, I fucked up and he goes, it's just not that simple. It's just not black and white. It'd be a lot easier if it was. Up until that moment, I had lived my life in black or white, right or wrong, better, worse, good, bad, because it was easy. I argued that people overcomplicated things, but the reality was I was letting myself off the hook. Abstinence is much easier than moderation. And to be able to play in the gray, to recognize there's actually a huge spectrum of experience, not just one end or the other. That is the nuance that Orwell is talking about. He warns in 1984 because he sees the honesty in power. It is manipulative, purposefully manipulative for an agenda. So Orwell is doing his best to remind us that perception can be reclaimed. You always have a choice, and it starts with what you believe, what you hear, what you see. And if you're willing to say, I know that's not 100% accurate, it just isn't, it can't be. My thoughts aren't facts, my feelings aren't facts, my perception isn't the only way to see this. That's where your options begin. Orwell's deeper gift is the reminder that perception can be reclaimed. He believed the act of clear writing was a moral act because clarity rebuilds freedom from the inside out. And what better way to do that than a little bit of fantasy fiction, right? But let's make that real. Imagine your organization, your business, your art collective, your community, but imagine it as its own micro ministry, not of truth, but of transparency. Every message, every marketing asset, every mission statement, it's a spell. It can hypnotize or it can heal. It can compress imagination into compliance, or it can expand possibility into purpose. The choice sits in syntax. That's why I think 1984 belongs in a business conversation. The battlefield of this 21st century isn't land or oil. It's storytelling. It's our narratives. Who defines reality defines value. We're seeing that across all forms of currency right now. What defines value defines behavior. The ends justify the means. I mean, we're seeing some abhorrent choices, defensible by beliefs. I mean, we always have, right? But it is our values that inform our perceptions, and recognizing that things and people and context, times are different, is this gray area, this nuance that Orwell and I believe, are talking about. But I think my point is behavior at scale becomes culture, which is why this matters in business. Culture isn't built by policy. It's built by our stories. We know that now. But in Orwell's time, this was revolutionary. If you're an artist, a creator, a CEO, a dreamer, you're already in agreement with Orwell, with me. You're fighting the good fight. The war for words still means something. When 1984 ends, Winston, the protagonist, breaks, not dissimilar to Brave New World. It could feel like a doomsday manual. It could feel like heartbreak. When Winston breaks, he confesses, he conforms, he says he loves Big Brother. Readers often close this book in despair, but rereading it now, I read it differently. I read it as like a test. Orwell is asking us, now that you've seen what surrender looks like, what will you do? What are you clear on, having now felt this end? It's not a period, it's a comma. He wrote the worst possible ending so that we could write better ones. And that's exactly where we stand today, between the algorithm telling us what to think and the imagination knowing what's possible, between the feed and the field. The world has never been more surveilled, yet never more transparent. It's never been more manipulated, but never more self-aware. That's the tension. That's the opportunity. The raw material and the enlightenment. And I think that's where we're all struggling right now. It's overwhelming. We don't know how to manage this yet. And that's okay. I think that's what 1984 offers you, is the recognition, like, hey, if we play it through, this is what might happen. And I don't like that. Now I know that. How do I want to move forward in a creative and inspired way? So as we step deeper into Orwell's design, remember, he didn't give us despair, he gave us diagnostics. He proved that tyranny begins with language, which means liberation can begin there as well. Every time you name something truthfully for your truth, you rebuild a fragment of your reality. Every time you tell a story that enlarges understanding instead of narrowing it, you push back on the walls of the ministry. That's the work. That's the invitation. We're going to decode the mechanisms themselves. Doublethink, Thoughtcrime, the entrepreneurial power hidden in fiction's most terrifying metaphors. Because once you understand how perception is programmed, you become the programmer. You can reprogram ethically, creatively, and courageously. You are not Winston Smith. You are the author, and your book has yet to be written. Your page, this page, is still blank. I like to continue to pull focus to the context within which the author was writing, and then get back into the story. These Quantum Business Book Clubs are my readings and my interpretations done through this lens of creative entrepreneurship, visionary leadership, this willingness to build in the most destructive times, most being arguable. It's exactly what we're talking about here, right? I don't believe it actually is the most. I just think we have more visibility than we've ever had. Therefore, it feels like the most, especially since I haven't lived through a world war. Fingers crossed. But we already know the smell of Orwell's world, stale air, the sound, the buzz of industrialization and machination. He was also facing down a new sense of industrialization. This, not dissimilar to Huxley, the threat of machines replacing man. And that din never slept. The factories stopped closing. The weekends were diminishing. The genius of 1984 wasn't in its horror, it was its precision. Orwell wasn't imagining monsters, he was just describing power. In 1984, truth became liquid. Every morning, the clerks at the Ministry of Truth rewrite old newspapers so that the past always blesses the present. The party's genius lies in its grammar. Who controls the language controls the mind. You can feel it now in our feeds, in our dashboards, in our quarterly decks. Change the metric and you change the meaning. The numbers can't lie, but the data can definitely tell a story. Adjust the headline and you adjust history. It isn't evil, it's just efficiency. That's what Orwell called doublethink, the ability to hold two opposing truths and believe both. To know a product pollutes and can still be sustainable. to promise disruption while worshiping stability, to preach innovation but punish deviation. The danger isn't hypocrisy, it's fluency, the way the lie starts to sound like leadership. When Winston Smith, the quiet clerk, begins to keep a diary, he commits the book's first act of rebellion. He writes, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4." In our world, that sounds naive, almost quaint. Yet, every founder who tells an inconvenient truth to their investors is performing the same equation. Every artist who refuses to rename their vision for market comfort is declaring that 2 + 2 is still 4. The second act is desire. Winston meets Julia, the woman who reminds him that pleasure can be sacred when it's chosen and not assigned. Their love is clumsy, human, defiant. In a regime built on surveillance, intimacy itself becomes revolution. That's the parable. In any system addicted to metrics, unmeasured emotion is freedom. For creators, Julia is the archetype of creative impulse, the part of you that still flirts with possibility when logic says don't. Winston is the rational mind, Julia, the imaginative body. The party tortures Winston until he betrays her. But symbolically, the scene warns what happens when intellect is separated from intuition. When reason disowns wonder, the empire wins. Then comes O'Brien, the mentor turned inquisitor. He embodies the executive voice that says, "I love your ideals. Let me operationalize them." He's the strategist of submission, teaching Winston that truth is whatever power declares. O'Brien is every consultant who drains the magic out of a mission in the name of scalability. I want to read that one again, but I think I'm the only one that actually gets off on that line. Coach versus consultant. The torture chamber in 1984 is called the Ministry of Love. It's a perfect metaphor for how institutions weaponize care. Again, you can't make this shit up. Like, the parallels are just uncanny. That's why I included these two, because they're pretty dark to kick off this little fantasy fiction series. But they're only dark if you read them as condemnations and not as launch pads, which, you know, I'm always going to find the opportunity. The Ministry of Love, the perfect metaphor for weaponized care. When every company says, "We're family," while demanding 24/7 loyalty, that's exactly what we're talking about. Love becomes leverage. Your families might even do this. I don't know any families like that, right? Orwell's mastery is that he doesn't simply condemn. He maps the interior of surrender. Winston's final line, his confession of love for Big Brother, it's not the triumph of tyranny, it's the autopsy of meaning. It shows how fear can overwrite language and how survival can rewrite the soul. That's what we're being faced with right now. And the judgment, the othering, again, the condemnation of those who have been overwrought by fear, who are justifying behavior by survival, who have willingly sacrificed their souls to survive. This is not something they perceive as being a choice. Survival isn't a choice, or so we might be led to believe, or so we might even have forgotten that that's our choice. So I hope you hear what I am trying to say in this, which is it's nuanced. That's what Orwell was trying to say. The capital T truth is your perception, and others just simply perceive things differently. Can we have the capacity to hold that? And what does that really mean for us as these builders, these creatives of the 21st century, the creators of this 21st century? It means that doublethink isn't ancient fiction. It's not something of fantasy fiction fodder. It is our daily design challenge. Every time you craft a statement, a message, a mission, you decide whether to clarify or camouflage. Every marketing campaign will ask, does this enlarge perception or anesthetize it? Every product that claims to empower must answer the Orwellian test. Does it free attention or harvest it? Thought crime in Orwell's world isn't the act, it's the intention. I'm going to reread that line. Thought crime in Orwell's world isn't the act, it's the intention. For any of my clients out there listening, you know, I ask you 9 times out of 10 before messaging internally or externally, what's your intention? That is the energy behind not just the action, but your words. And it changes everything. The glimmer of an unapproved idea is this sense, this entrepreneurial knowing. We can be professional thought criminals. We can also be professional protagonists. You imagine the alternatives. You are the creative. Your ideas might threaten the current order of things. Some describe this as disrupting. That can be good or bad. It can be done from a truly imaginative, inspired place. And it can be used in a way that is harmful. These are the nuances. These are the nuances. You know, I always think about that documentary on Facebook that the creators of Facebook just thought it would be a beautiful way to connect, and it was. And also, there are bad players out there who are using it as a really nefarious place to influence. It can be both. And the question is whether you can sustain imagination without turning it into an ideology. The party's greatest insight was to make rebellion predictable, then profitable. Ours is to make imagination renewable. We don't need another counterculture that becomes a brand. We need a culture of continual awakening. We need to build a microcosm that allows everyone to be creative, which means we're all going to be a little bit different, doing different things at different times for different reasons. Can that be okay? Orwell's fiction is often read as despair, but look closer. He trusted imagination enough to make fear intelligible. He used story as a diagnostic tool, turning anxiety into awareness. That's what founders do at their best. They sense this invisible tension, and then they prototype a response. Seen that way, 1984 isn't anti-hope, it's proto-strategy. It teaches that when systems manipulate perception, the only sustainable advantage is integrity of attention. In business terms, attention is your scarcest resource. In spiritual terms, it's your soul. So how do you protect it? Start with language. Name things precisely. Tune into your energy behind your words and action. Replace buzzwords with metaphors that breathe. Build cultures where saying, I don't know, is rewarded. Because ignorance admitted is curiosity restored. Teach teams to write not for marketing, but for meaning. Clear sentences create clear sightlines. So remember, Winston's tiny rebellion, his notebook, his words on a page, no one may ever read. And that one I think is just so, just create for the sake of creating. Think for the fun of thinking. Craft because it feels rewarding. That's how revolutions start, with one person choosing precision over propaganda. Fiction itself becomes the counterspell. Orwell turned imagination, the very faculty despised by totalitarian systems, into a weapon for truth. That's the paradox every artist understands. You invent to reveal, not to escape. And here's the hopeful twist. Fiction really does work both ways. If false stories can enslave, true stories can liberate. The same neural pathways that allow manipulation also allow awakening. That's neuroplasticity as revolution. The human mind can be rewritten, and it can also reimagine. So as you listen, remember, you are not just analyzing a novel, you're rehearsing a survival skill. Clarity is your creative advantage. Attention is your rebellion. Language is your code for freedom. When Orwell wrote 1984, he was dying. He knew he might not live to see the century he was warning. 1949, 100%. But he probably didn't know if he was going to live into the next decade. He knew that writers, builders, creators, artists, believers would inherit his blueprint. And he left us this diagnostic manual for an illness we now have the tools to cure. We cure it every time we tell a truer story. So let's talk a little bit about how the science and the economics, how our current societal and political world have not just caught up with Orwell's intuition, but our fears are playing through into this co-created perception. Our data is shaping our beliefs, and our leaders are using this awareness. Therefore, it is our anxiety we get to navigate to choose between our mission and purpose or a world that profits off of our confusion and fear. Understanding fear isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of strategy. So, to bring it back into Orwell's 1984, picture this. A room full of citizens staring at a screen. A face appears, enemy of the state for today. And within seconds, everyone's shouting. They're not told what to feel. They're shown how. Rage becomes choreography. And for 2 minutes, belonging feels electric. We can all relate to this. So that's Orwell's first lesson. Outrage is the easiest glue that binds. He called it the 2 minutes hate. We call it the news cycle. He wasn't mocking people. Orwell was mapping emotion as infrastructure. The party didn't need belief. It only needed reaction. Sound familiar? Now imagine that same energy today. A viral post, a trending scandal, a rival's misstep, a brand's mishap. Algorithm watch our anger spike and whisper, more, now, faster again, thanks. Behavioral economists later proved why it works. Fear and fury are high engagement emotions. Kahneman and Tversky called it loss aversion. We'll do twice as much to avoid pain as to seek pleasure. Propaganda departments had the instinct, data teams have the math. Orwell's hero, Winston Smith. He works at the Ministry of Truth. His job, re-editing old newspapers so the past always matches the party's present, we've discussed. If you change yesterday's numbers, delete the inconvenient quote, reprint and proof, consistency achieved. He doesn't destroy history. He manages a version for control. If that sounds abstract, check your insights. For those of us in business, perhaps it's your dashboard. We rewrite our own pasts constantly, reframing missed targets as learning cycles. I do it all the time. The problem is the opportunity. We swap the story to keep the line up and to move it in our direction, our chosen path. It's not malice, it's momentum. But momentum without memory is manipulation. Orwell's horror wasn't the lie. It was that the loss of evidence erased a truth from ever having existed. Psychologists at Yale later found that repetition creates belief. Say something often enough, even a polite half-truth, and the brain's fluency bias starts to treat familiarity as accuracy. That's why marketing works. That's why slogans outlive this nuance. The Ministry of Truth in 1984 had printing presses. Organizations have brand guidelines. In 1984, there was the telescreen, half television, half webcam, always on. Citizens never know when they're being watched, so they behave as if they are. That uncertainty is the control mechanism. Let me say that one more time, loud enough for you in the back. Uncertainty is the control mechanism. Today's version is subtler. Location services, predictive text, personalized everything, dynamic pricing. We're told surveillance is convenience. Orwell simply removed the user interface design. Neuroscience now gives his intuition a neural map. When people think they're being observed, the brain's social evaluation network lights up. Performance replaces presence. Creativity dips and conformity rises. Freedom and innovation share a nervous system. Winston eventually commits thought crime, the act of thinking privately. In his world, that's treason. In ours, it's entrepreneurship, it's creativity, it's art. Thought crime is simply imagination that hasn't been monetized yet. Every disruptive idea begins as hearsay. The danger is when the heretic starts optimizing for applause instead of truth. Orwell warns us, the revolution always risks becoming its own party. Keep that one in mind as well. So let's rewind history for another moment. In the 1930s, Britain's Ministry of Information and Germany's propaganda ministry studied the same science, how repetition, rhythm, and image could steer collective emotion. Americans called it public relations. When the war ended, the machinery didn't disappear, it changed industries. From morale to marketing in a single fiscal quarter. What Orwell was portraying in 1984, what couldn't be explicitly explained, was that if you can sell fear, you can sell anything. And we live that. The attention economy is propaganda's polite grandchild. Instead of shouting, believe, we find ourselves doom scrolling. Every ping is a micro summons to the modern 2 minutes hate. Compete, compare, react. The 1984 ministry, or these old ministries of yore, relied on scarcity of information. Ours relies on excess. Too much noise creates the same blindness as none. But here is where the hope cracks this concrete. You knew it was coming. The same behavioral science that explains manipulation also maps freedom. When researchers at the University of Amsterdam introduced mild uncertainty into learning tasks, we talked about this in Brave New World, but small playful friction, our ability to learn almost doubles. Discomfort fuels curiosity. Truth likes friction. Truth likes dissonance. Truth has the capacity to disagree. Truth embraces the nuance. Awe works even better. Neuroscientists in California found that moments of wonder, standing under trees, listening to music, reading poetry, quiet the brain's fear center. Awe dissolves ego and reboots perspective. Your imagination, your intuition, your creativity, dare I say your magic, is bigger than you. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than us. It allows us to tap into something that is awesome, and it is humbling, and it reminds us there is something bigger than just our own truth. Awe is the opposite of propaganda because it asks nothing from you except presence. Orwell's nightmare ends in a gray cell. Our antidote begins out there in full spectrum color. So again, what does this mean for us, for you, for me, for the builders, for the creatives, for the CEOs, for the founders, for the rule breakers? You can't outshout this algorithm, but you can outcreate it. Design spaces that reward curiosity instead of compliance. Use language that expands interpretation instead of narrowing it. Treat communication as a form of stewardship, not extraction. That's not soft, it's strategic. Transparency scales better than manipulation because it compounds trust. Modern economists call that positive sum attention. Everyone leaves the exchange with more clarity than they entered. You'll hear me talk about this as level 5, win-win-win, or nobody plays. Everybody can benefit if we create that opportunity. And if we can't, what if we pause? What if we just walk away? Because that opportunity is out there, and I'm not willing to stop until I find it. I just might have to change directions. I might have to get off this road. It might be a completely different vehicle, and there might be a completely different list of passengers. And I'm going to keep driving. This isn't utopian. That's not what I'm talking about. This is actually the 21st century's definition of efficient. Here we go, right? What is truth? What are the meanings of these words that we use? Fear burns fast. That level 2 is not sustainable. But curiosity is. It's energy accounting for soul. And let's not forget humor. The party in 1984 had no comedians. Jokes are tiny revolutions. They prove thought still moves faster than power. Laughter slips through every filter. You want to jump? You want to expand? You want to get to another level? Laugh. If you can still laugh, you haven't been programmed. So take a breath. Yeah, the propaganda's evolved. Yes, the systems are getting smarter. Yeah, the metrics are manipulative. But you know what's scaling? Awareness. People are noticing the strings. That's the inflection point Orwell couldn't model. He wasn't able to fantasize that far into the future. Self-awareness at network speed. Every act of consciousness is creation. Every CEO, every leader, every founder, every builder, every creator, every one of us who names things truthfully, every artist who refuses the easy frame, this is an update to humanity's source code. We don't defeat Big Brother by hiding from him. You know who you are. We outgrow him. We build systems so transparent, they make spying irrelevant. We make meaning so vivid, they look and their lies are grayscale in comparison. That's the plot twist of 1984. Orwell wasn't predicting the end of freedom. He was challenging us to invent better tools for it. He handed us the blueprint for thriving beyond tyranny: guard language, honor memory, feed wonder, tell jokes, stay human. So here's your takeaway from the research, the history, the neuroscientists, and the novels. Attention is a resource, but awareness is an art. You can train it. You can design for it. And when you do, the ministries lose their magic. So three little tactical experiments. We'll call them magic spells for this little sprint that you can test in your day-to-day. The diary. And I just need to say this. I don't ever My goal is to not tell you 3 things you've never fucking heard before or never tried. But what my goal is to give you 3 tactical takeaways you can test today in less than 5 minutes at no extra cost. Taking action, inspired action, aligned action, the energy behind the action to create the thing from this new space you're in right now because you've been listening for almost an hour. That's my goal, is to like get it in your body. That's what ritual is all about, right? It's making the magic real. Like I'm like touching myself right now. Like I am real. I think at least that's my truth today. So in 1984, Winston begins his rebellion with something embarrassingly small, a blank book. He opens it, dips a pen in ink, and writes words that could destroy him. He isn't plotting a coup. He's reclaiming language. Every word is an act of self-reclamation, of self-rescue. In a world that rewrites the past daily, remembering becomes revolutionary. Winston's diary isn't nostalgia. It's an anchor in the river of manipulation. When you name what you see, you reassert the perception still belongs to you. So the first tactic then is simple but dangerous. Bear witness. Write what you see without editing for elegance or approval or for anyone else's eyes. Document the moment before interpretation coats it in safety, before we even justify it in our own retelling of our stories. This isn't journaling for self-help. This isn't a gratitude journal. This is record keeping for civilization. You may never read it again. That's not the point. The art of articulation reclaims your inner ministry of truth. It teaches your mind that experience precedes narrative, that your own senses still count as data. Here's a little prompt. What's one truth I've seen today that would vanish if I didn't name it? I can think of 100 already. Things that I push myself through out of desire, performance, need, so many different stories that I tell myself. But at the end of the day, I crossed a threshold and it wasn't good. I can name that. Vice versa. I did something for someone to help them without actually knowing if I'm helping or hindering, but it just kind of felt like the right thing in the moment. You know how I will know if it was the right thing? The end result. I don't know the end result yet, which means I'm going to rewrite that moment later. I know that, so I can capture it, the doubt, the fear, the insecurity, and also the hope and the altruism and the vision. It's really, really fucking interesting when we start going, this might be the right thing to do, and it might not. My intention is it's right, but I'm going off on a little side quest here. Thank you for joining me. I've realized I've done so much in my life to get something. Of course, that makes perfect sense, right? We go to work to get money. We build relationship to receive support. But so much I have dressed up as this noble cause. And the end result bit me in the ass. And it's because my intention wasn't true altruism. I am doing this because I think it's the right thing to do. And that's what feels good to me in this moment. I am not attached to the outcome. I was really attached to the outcome. And there might have been a few other things I was attached to, like ego and performance and perception and influence and power. But had I not captured that in the moment, I don't know that I would have had the ability to recognize, like, oh, we actually fucked up there. It kind of doesn't matter that what the end result was. We were tricking ourselves. We were lying to ourselves. We are talking about ourselves in the third person, which means that this story is now over. I think you get what I'm saying. Diary about your truths in the moment. Tactic number 2, the paperweight. Midway through the novel, Winston buys a small glass paperweight from a dusty shop. Inside it, a single piece of coral floats in clear stillness. It serves no function. It is simply beautiful. For Winston, it becomes proof that useless things still exist, and therefore, so does freedom. The party hates beauty because beauty resists utility. Orwell's paperweight is the oldest spell. Aesthetic experience as rebellion. To find joy in something that earns nothing is to remember you are not machinery. So the second tactic is this: protect the beautiful and the pointless. Leave space in your day for what serves no outcome. Gaze, wander, listen, lose yourself in a moment. Make a small sanctuary of non-transaction. Every tyranny begins by economizing wonder. When you insist on wonder anyway, you dilute control as a source. When you seek out awe, you will find yourself awestruck. In the same way a coral builds a reef molecule by molecule, every moment of unproductive beauty builds the architecture of sanity. So ask yourself, where in my world can I protect something precious without needing it to perform? In 1984, Winston and Julia invent their own language, not new words, but a new rhythm of speech, laced with double meanings and glances that only they can translate. Their love affair is really a linguistic one. They create a world within words that power cannot enter. Even when they are watched, the code of tenderness remains theirs. So this third tactic is a secret language. Speak in your own dialect. It's not secrecy, it's sovereignty. This is why organizations have lingo and jargon. This is why industries have buzz terms. It conveys an aliveness, a frame of thought that's different. The ability to use words as portals rather than prisons. When language collapses into slogans, which we also know it can do, and that's when it becomes manipulative. Invent metaphor. When meaning is flattened, speak in image and music. Language shapes perception, and perception is destiny. The party rewrote words to shrink thought. You can expand words to restore it. Every poem, every story, every conversation that enlarges imagination is a spell of liberation. So here's the secret. The tongue learns truth through play. Even the smallest joke, the tiniest pun, the misspoken words laughed aloud, they unravel dogma. Humor is a language remembering its elasticity. So your last tactic, takeaway, pondering. Ask yourself, what new word, image, or even inside joke could return aliveness to my conversations? So these 3 tactics from today, from 1984, they form a circle. The diary anchors truth, the paperweight restores beauty, and the secret language renews connection. Truth, beauty, and connection. These are not luxuries, my friend. They are infrastructure for consciousness, for your 21st century business. Orwell feared they would be erased. But our task is simple. We just keep them alive. You being here, me making this, us co-creating together, check. When you record, when you protect, when you create, when you play with words, you are rebuilding your nervous system, but you are also repairing the nervous system of this world. This isn't a metaphor. This is neuroplasticity. This is collective neuroplasticity. Attention recognizes itself around what it celebrates. Celebrate truth and it strengthens. Celebrate wonder and it multiplies. Celebrate connection and the signal of fear begins to fade. This is how civilizations heal. One mind remembering you. One heart delighting, that's you. One conversation daring to be human, that's us right now. You don't need permission. You already have the tools. These are the same tools Orwell wielded while coughing up blood on a cold island, having survived war. These tools are words, perception, and love. So keep your diary, guard your coral, and speak your code. The party isn't defeated by violence. It dies of laughter, awe, and remembering. We did it. We made it through 1984. Even if you've never opened the book, you've now walked its corridors, seen the fog, felt the hum of the telescreen, watched truth bend under pressure. And yet here you are, not crushed, but clear-eyed. The point of this journey was not prediction. Orwell wasn't condemning our current reality, his future. He was proving that awareness survives anything. And as we sit here discussing and sharing and musing on his awareness, as you listen now, you can feel it. Something is opening. An inner knowing that whispers, yeah, I am free. I have the space. There is capacity. No agenda, no strategy, just curiosity. So release the rigidity, the othering, the judgment. I know it's fucking hard out there. You know, every one of my clients is like, how am I supposed to stay hopeful and toe the line when my external circumstances are suffocating? I'm not saying it's easy. What I'm suggesting is that you have this capacity. It has actually been forcibly expanded by how challenging things are. Integrate all of it. Integrate what's whole. Endure with open eyes. The words, the connection, the compassion, these are the gestures of evolution, of revolution. They sketch the post-Orwellian blueprint. You know, when people talk about this Orwellian reality, what they're forgetting is we get to create reality. And if we don't like it, we can use words, connection, and love to redraft. I don't even want to say but to build in the 21st century. A world where awareness replaces control, where collaboration replaces coercion, and where resilience replaces fear. Because the novel ended in surrender, that's exactly why you don't have to. The future belongs to the lucid, the loving, the curious. We've inherited Orwell's warning, but we've also got his hope. Like, why did he write this? To course correct, to inspire, to play through the Orwellian potential, and to give us the space to create something far beyond that. We are the new truth keepers. You, me, the builders, the believers. That do I need to keep saying it? Don't worry, I will. The artists, the creators, the founders, the CEOs, the self-employed. God, yeah, believe me, I know it's getting challenging out there. It's always been challenging. Artists are the architects of coherence. Every story that honors what's real, every product that serves what's human, every act of wonder, that's how we win. That's how we create the win-win-win. Language is your light. Story is your strategy. Wonder is your weapon. And hope is the discipline that keeps them all alive. That's how we thrive. Next week, we're getting out of the dystopian and into the devotion. We're going to get very ethereal in the next one. We're going to read The Little Prince. And that probably feels like a leap, but that book was written at the same time and by someone who had just been through what both Huxley and Orwell had also been through. And I found that fascinating. So next week, we're going to talk about using innocence in the age of information and draft a guide to leading. So until then, stay open, keep your perspective planetary, keep fanning that flame. You're not surviving history, you're rewriting it. Thank you for being here. I love you.